I'm your host, Effie Pilarino, and today I have the great pleasure to connect with an old friend, Benedict Nolens from Hong Kong, with whom we met in person. What a privilege these days. I think 3 years ago, Benny, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we met in a very exotic place in Oman.
Yeah.
It was the first blockchain summit of a country. And at the time you were wearing the hat of being head of fintech in the Securities and Commission in Hong Kong, right?
Yes, that's right. That was my first visit to Oman, and that was in that capacity. Yeah. And I went back one more time for a similar blockchain summit in back then my capacity of working for Circle. So I've had the privilege to go twice.
Yeah, yeah, and also you've had the how can I say, the sixth sense, if you want, to explore this area of fintech. I think of, blockchain and its use cases as part of fintech, sort of cutting edge technology, one of the many cutting edge technologies where we are exploring different use cases. And today, in your the head of the innovation hub of the Bank of International Settlements in Hong Kong, and in that capacity, you are leading a lot of very interesting research innovation projects. And today, we want to take the time and focus more on the green project that you've been exploring. It's called Genesis, and we'll have the opportunity to talk about it more. So welcome, Benedict, and thank you for taking the time to be with us and enlighten us after an amazing week, a fintech week in Hong Kong, right? and the COP26. So I'm sure you have a lot of insights to share with us coming out of those major events. So tell us, what exactly is this Genesis project? And we'll have the time to talk about the reports, the beautiful reports with the Lotus images that you have just put out.
Yes, so this project is called Genesis by the book of Genesis, so to say, right? The origins when there was still, so to say, paradise, where there wasn't such thing as green and brown, where it was all green. But in sum, the project is about, we framed it as tokenizing government green bonds. And the idea was that, first of all, as a BIS Innovation Hub, we work very closely with the central bank. And the central bank places these bonds on behalf of the Hong Kong government, which is the Financial and Treasury Bureau of the Hong Kong government, the FSTB. And so in sum, we wanted to frame a project with them that focused on specifically government bonds and specifically green, and then specifically with the focus on the retail. So these are all different elements, so to say, right? So the government places many types of bonds. They're not necessarily green, but for this purpose, we wanted to focus on green. And then secondly, we wanted to focus on the tokenization element in terms of fractionalizing the investment. And that's where the connectivity to retail comes in. So we thought for retail investors, the smaller the fractions, the more interesting it gets, right? And inversely, we also thought that retail investors can be particularly interested in green bonds. And again, that combination of being able to invest in very small amounts and something that is highly safe, government bonds and green, we thought would be highly attractive for example, the millennial generation. But frankly, it could really be for any generations if it can easily be bought on an app. And so where does the green element come in is that we do have a green information feed whereby the retail investors can get transparency as to the impact of their investment. So the assumption in this prototype is that the investment is made, for example, into the construction of a solar farm, and the solar farm outputs then generate carbon credits. And these carbon credits can be reflected on the app in aggregate, but they can also be fractionalized to the size of your investment. So our idea was to show all of this on an easy to use app for retail investors. So an app they can download, an app where they can in sum subscribe to these bonds in very small amounts. We set it at 100 Hong Kong dollars, which is around 10 euros. And where they can get that transparency of not only the coupons, but also the carbon credits over the life of that bond. That was our idea.
Fantastic. So here you are combining distributed ledger technology to tokenize and fractionalize and offer transparency, full transparency to retail, I guess. But what I want to understand more, this is on a permissioned or permissionless ledger. From looking at the papers, I understand that you have looked at two different versions, one that is a public blockchain and another one that is a non-public blockchain. And then how does this connect with the rest of the world? So if I'm a retail investor and I have, my regular accounts, my wallets and so on, is this separate? How does it connect to that?
Yeah, so maybe I start first with the question on public versus permission-based chain. In fact, we have two prototypes that we developed, and we put the reports on our website. So one prototype was developed with something that is called the Liberty Consortium, which is a group around Standard Chartered Bank, SE Ventures, and then Shareable Assets. So Shareable Asset is one of these asset tokenization firms. And then SE Ventures is the venture arm of Standard Chartered. They decided to build it on Stellar, which is a public blockchain, as you know. I would say we, from our perspective, are blockchain agnostic. However, for this purpose, we did really seek out doing it on both a permission-based ledger and a public blockchain. So that is the public blockchain prototype. But we can get back to this question later. Both of these prototypes, irrespective of whether public blockchain or permission-based, actually have full compliance with KYC, with Know Your Customer. And this was an important aspect we wanted to show as well, because oftentimes people associate public blockchains with, let's say, the inability to trace the assets or to trace the investors. And we obviously wanted to demonstrate that you can build some pretty clear KYC rails around this, which is what we've done in these prototypes.
Is it through whitelisting that you do this?
No, in some, when the investor downloads the app, they KYC themselves. And given that we made this prototype specific at this stage, with prototypes, you can go very wide or you can go narrow and say, let's focus on first doing this narrower field. So given we focused on a Hong Kong government bonds, they only get placed to people with a Hong Kong ID. And our ID system is actually extremely advanced. So, and the apps, they are both privately owned apps. For example, there is the likes of Jumio and Onfido, but there's also our government system, which is called IAMSmart. So the privately owned apps, they can easily recognize actually fakes from real IDs because the ID system is so solid and so well established in Hong Kong. But we also show the connectivity to the government infrastructure, which is called IAMSmart, from which that verification can be direct versus the government infrastructure. So in sum, it can be either done with, showing your face, showing your ID and the reconciliation over a private app, or it can be done by direct verification versus the public infrastructure. And then once you've done that, then in sum, you can see the bond that is available for sale, and you can subscribe to whatever amount suitable within the remit of amounts that we would permit. So for example, let's say I would want to, I have Hong Kong identity card, I've KYC'd myself, then I can subscribe to that 100 Hong Kong dollars, or if I want 1,000 Hong Kong dollars of that bond. And that then gets, in some through the use of the blockchain, it gets properly registered, as you know. We also showed the ability to have a secondary market around it. Yeah.
Amazing. And Bene, from reviewing these papers, I understand that this prototype also takes advantage of the Internet of Things, in the sense of, in the example that you mentioned before of assuming that we're talking about tokenizing a solar farm that the government has developed. There, you're using IoT technology to sort of link the physical farm to the carbon credits of that project and then to the flows of the bond, correct?
Yes. So in some, we are, the assumption is that, let's say the government raises, let's now say it raises a couple of 100 million and it invests it in the construction of renewable energy. And let's keep it simple for now. Let's do solar farms. Around these solar farms, there's always been meters. So there's a meter system, right? That meters how much output that solar farm is generating. And that output can actually be tracked and traced on blockchain, so that you have carbon credits de facto on blockchain, which you could say is the provenance application of blockchain, which is quite important in the case of carbon credits. And it might well be one of the foundations for carbon credit trading in the future. Carbon credit trading is still a very difficult matter globally, for example, because the carbon price is not consistent, and also because you might not know whether the carbon credits have been used or not. So when they are traced on blockchain, then that becomes easier to monitor. So, and in some, by also the same monitoring, we can on that app show transparency to the investor and say, this solar farm has now generated X output. And of course, if I only invest 20 euros, then my output is going to be limited, but we can show it in aggregate over the whole investment into the solar farm. These numbers are very big. And then obviously you will just be a small part of that if you have only invested 20 euros. But nevertheless, you can feel completely connected to having realized that, right? And these bonds they come with the normal coupon returns. So in some, you're doing good, you have transparency, you're feeling good. It's all these elements combined.
And also it gives the opportunity to investors to create a diversified portfolio if they were to participate in a few different such green tokenized bonds that are in different
exactly
of the green sort of spectrum,
exactly,
which is also
so while we narrowed this one to let's say government bonds, obviously, as you implied, it can be used for corporate bonds, or this can be used for bonds of any government, or this can be used for a platform of bonds of different governments, or a platform of bonds of corporates across different countries. So we made a very narrow application to make it very, very understandable. But of course, it can be brought to another level if there's more participants on the platform in terms of issuers.
So it's fair to say that I can envision from this that this prototype can be copied, if you want, and customized on exchanges or that deal a lot with green corporate bonds.
Yes.
Especially here in Europe, I'm thinking, Luxembourg and Switzerland, that are big hubs, and take this technology, if you want, an architecture to do this. Now, is this also something that can help issuers and companies in their risk assessment in terms of, when they look at climate risk and so on? Have you looked at that aspect or not?
Yeah, so maybe I want to go back a step to what you just said about exchanges. So we had a very big advisory panel for this specific work product, and it included indeed the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. But you just mentioned European exchanges, and I think yes. The beauty of this idea is that it connects the retail investor to green. And I know in Europe, there is now some evolution ongoing on allowing tokenized assets and access by investors. We did want to show with this, though, that to a large extent, if you think about tokenization, you're thinking about small fractions. Actually, that's the origin of the idea, right? So it is, in my view, very synergetic with retail. Right. So any area where there would be a desire to build such a platform for green bonds, of course, if it's retail investors, it needs to be safe bonds. But in a bigger area like Europe, it would obviously make complete sense. Yes, and it could be done for corporates as well as for governments. As I mentioned, it does not need to be limited to governments. Governments might be the safest asset, but many of the corporates are also very safe assets.
Very safe, yes.
And so, yeah, so in terms of investor diversification, definitely green bonds is, if anything, the principal instrument right now, as you know, right? So green bonds have a huge, I didn't check the last numbers, but again, the Climate Bond Initiative was part of our advisory panel. And these numbers are very, very large. In fact, climate bonds are one of the first green products, you could say. And the reason why they took off so well is because there was early on efforts within the industry to standardize. Now, of course, I know there is concern around greenwashing, but sometimes you have to look at the positive more than the negative, right? And the positive is that these are huge markets that have been created over the last, let's say, 7 years. And that have been steadily growing across the corporate sector and across the government sector. And in part, I think that was based on that private sector initiative to create some standards. And the standards are maybe not yet perfect, but yes, as said, we wouldn't be where we are without having had those standards already quite some years ago. And of course, these products can be in anybody's portfolio as a matter of diversification. Yeah.
And the Genesis project and prototype that you are putting out there is advancing transparency clearly, and therefore mitigating, the problems that exist. And like with anything, the market has to mature. So we have to move forward with better technologies and broader adoption through retail and in general, more adoption, making it easier for everybody to get involved, because that will push better practices, both on the accounting front and on any financial reporting front.
Yeah.
So as you said, we should stop focusing on the greenwashing and other shortcomings and just continue to make things better in the market. And on that note, I want to congratulate the Innovation Hub for this type of initiative. And if you would be kind enough to just share with us what other big initiatives you are working on at the Innovation Hub, in addition to this, and how they all fit together.
Yes, so in our Innovation Hub, we have several centers. So we have the Hong Kong Center, the Singapore Center, the Swiss Center. We're opening a center in the Bank of England, one in Stockholm for the Nordics. We will have one in Canada. We have partnership with the Fed, and then we have one more coming in the Eurozone. That's the long-awaited one. So we're definitely looking forward to that one opening up as well. And so we're getting, I would say, an increasingly broad portfolio now of projects. So let's say the starting tree was Singapore, Hong Kong, and Switzerland. So for me, I wanted to really have a green project, and I wanted it around asset tokenization, and I wanted it to be something where we could show that it could be compliant, regulatory compliant with the KYC aspects, and also connected to asset to retail community agenda. So that's one of our projects. But other than those, we have a lot of projects, in fact, in the payment space, no surprise, because the BIS is the convener of the central banks. And we have, amongst the ones in payments, we have a lot in the CBDC space, so in the central bank digital currency space. And in that regard, my center is handling both a retail CBDC project, to which we issued a paper on called the e-Hong Kong dollar. It is a possible infrastructure for a retail CBDC. And just from a general perspective, retail CBDC is still quite evolving, and people are at this stage, countries are adopting different architectures. That's why I'm saying it is a possible architecture. There isn't one possible architecture only. There is more than one possible architecture, and I think time will a little bit start informing us as to why certain architectures are preferred over others. And another project we're working on is a multi-CBDC project. That project is about connecting various central banks. In our case, we're working with 4 central banks, and to ensure that the currency of those central banks can be used much faster for settlement. So again, we're using the principles of crypto, in fact, of atomic settlement, but then at country level or at central bank level in some. One of the, I think you will know, if you want to do an international transfer via wire at this stage of evolution, right? It always takes several days, and it has a fixed cost to it. That cost, of course, may be less significant for a bigger amount, but there is always that cost, and there is always the delay. And what the Enbridge prototype has shown is that this can be reduced, the delay can be reduced from days to seconds, and the cost can be very significantly reduced as well, if you take into account that these transfers can actually be made atomically. Now, there are certain things to still be worked out. For example, the reason why it takes several days right now, in part, is actually because of the KYC and the AML requirements. And these are incredibly important, right? Because otherwise we live in an terrorism. So they do need to be satisfied. The question is, how can we reach the level of safety that we need from that perspective, while also have very speedy transfer? And in some, we're still working on seeing how we can achieve that, because that is the current one of the current main roles of the correspondent banking system. But by having the correspondent banks in the middle, that KYC gets repeated from the sending bank to the correspondent bank, and then again from that correspondent bank to the receiving bank. So in some, you have a duplication of processes that causes in part that delay, and in part also the cost. But there are other reasons for the cost that are more linked to the fact that these transactions are not atomic, for example.
Great, Benedict, and we look forward to the innovations and the proposals and prototypes that come out of this research. And I want to stress again the fact that you're bringing together a variety, a diverse set of experts working on these projects, and this is really important, because these are global issues that affect the economy. No matter what, payments remain core to the economy, and this is very important, the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being with us. And please tell our audience how they can follow the evolution of the work that's going on and what you are involved in.
Thank you. So yes, the mission of the BIS Innovation Hub is to create public goods in the space of technology. So you're right, we always have to focus on the public good aspect of things, and specifically within the context of the central banking community. And as you mentioned, payment is central for all practical purposes like commerce, but also from therefore a financial stability and a monetary stability perspective. And as central banks, that is the core of our mission, so to say. For the BIS Innovation Hub, we actually have a very well-kept and transparent website. So if you do Google BIS Innovation Hub, you will be able to sort by teams. We have 6 teams that we work on at present, including those that I set out, which is financial market infrastructures, CBDC, green finance, but we also have cyber, for example, SupTech and RegTech, and we have open finance. So these 6 teams, and then across these 6 teams, we have projects that are handled out of these different centers. And so on our website, you can check by center, you can check by project, you can check by team, and you can check by publication. So we've put in place multiple methods. And so for Genesis, we have, for example, that overlaying report that gives you the general landscape of green finance, including the challenges still ahead. And then we have the 2 prototype reports. One is built on a public ledger, and the other one built on a permission-based ledger with distribution mechanism as well to a wallet system in Hong Kong.
I will make sure that I'll be sharing these links in the commentary of our video, because there's a lot there, and depending on the interests, it's important that our listeners can check these. Benedict, thank you so much for being with us again, and look forward to next year, more discussions around the CBDC projects.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Epian. It was great to see you again after our last meeting in Oman.